So what are some of the best practices we can do to kind of fix or to kind of implement that idea of identifying problems early? And really, that's it. It's not necessarily only about fixing the problems. It's about identifying it as early as possible. It's not only what is the problem, but when you find out what the problem is. And the first step to do that is increase the feedback system and decrease the time to receive feedback. So the first step you need to do is establish consistent metrics that you want to track across the project. Not every, or I think it's probably very few construction projects that are going to have a very obvious metric like how many cubic yards of concrete you need to pour a day. But anytime that you can establish a quantity that you're tracking from a production standpoint, that's going to be very critical to kind of establish goals and metrics that you need to meet on a day-to-day basis. And what we recommend for contractors, if it doesn't break into quantities as easily as that, use a percentage complete. And that's always a little tough because there's going to be a bit of a subjective nature to that. How do you measure whether you're 10% or 15% complete? But what we have found in our experience is that act of, the crew kind of going through and saying, how much do I think I'm done? That's kind of establishing those goals and metrics for them. And it kind of keeps you honest in terms of, are you on schedule? Are you behind schedule? Are you ahead of schedule? So that's, if you can do the quantities, doing a percent complete is the next best thing. The next thing we always recommend is to track it on a daily basis rather than a weekly basis. This is probably one of the trickiest things we see contractors struggle with, that if they are doing production tracking, it is usually coming from their payroll system, which kind of runs on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And as we kind of saw from the example, if you're waiting 2 weeks to get the information about where you stand from a production standpoint, you've lost a lot of opportunity to kind of recover from whatever mishaps you might have regarding your labor costs. So if you kind of implement a system where you're getting that feedback on a daily basis, it's giving kind of your crew much more up-to-date knowledge and sooner notifications that they might need to kind of change what they're doing if they're already kind of running behind schedule. And then the very last part of this is you need to focus on the root cause. What I was taught early in my career, and I think what works really well, is ask yourself why 5 times. If you're running over budget, why is this happening? Okay, you have the answer to that, ask why again. Why is that happening? Do that 5 times, and by the time you ask why on the 5th time, chances are you're getting pretty darn close to what the root cause of the problem might be. And what's really helpful as you're kind of going through this exercise is if the data you're looking at has the ability to drill into it. So you're not just looking at kind of a blank spreadsheet of information. You're kind of able to click on specific data metrics and say, okay, let me go to the next level down to see what are the different transactions and the different specific data that's making up the information I'm looking at. The next one is increased planning. We talked about it at the beginning. What causes a lot of labor overruns is more from a planning standpoint. It's the missing material, it's the missing information. It's not being on the same page with other contractors. So increasing the planning is something I think every contractor knows they should be doing, but often kind of falls by the wayside as you're going through the days or the day-to-day grind of a typical construction schedule. So a couple of things that we always recommend is doing 2 to 3 week look ahead. I think this is something a lot of contractors do to begin with, but where we've kind of find contractors struggle is to really implement that into your day-to-day operations. Look at it on a everyday basis to make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do. You're keeping yourself honest, that you're not only kind of mapping out what you plan to do each day, but also what you need to get everything done. Do you need the purchaser to send you out certain material by a certain date? Do you need the project manager to get you a response on an RFI by a certain date? It's really that kind of snapshot in time of, hey, what are we going to try and do on the job site, and what do we need to get it done? And then the other part of the planning that we always recommend is doing schedule pull planning, where you're kind of working backwards from what are the key milestones and what do you need to do to meet those milestones. I think it's kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people the first time they kind of do one of these working backwards, but we find it really helps contractors understand what is the sequence of events that needs to happen to make sure you hit the critical milestones on the dates that you need to hit them. And the very last thing that we always recommend, and this is what we kind of specialize at ProNovos, is increase access to project information. The first thing that's going to start with is giving digital access to project documents such as drawings, submittals, RFIs. Again, what causes kind of these labor overruns isn't the guys moving slow. It's that they may not have all the things that they need to have to do the work they need to in the field. So if you're giving them that digital access to drawings where, they're able to kind of pull it up on their iPad, the snap of their fingers, they're not having to run back to the office to print off a new set of plans. All those incremental minutes, really add up to over the course of a project. And giving them that immediate access to information helps kind of close that gap where they're flying blind, that they have kind of more that immediate access to what they need to do. And then the second part of that is giving digital access to on-demand financial reports. I think this is one that contractors can tend to be a little apprehensive about. They don't like to kind of give financial reports to the field because what happens if they leave that lying around somewhere, somebody picks it up who you don't want necessarily to be able to see it. And that's why we find giving it in a digital format helps kind of fix that. You don't have to worry about hard copies floating around the job site. But really the real advantage to this is you are giving your field kind of on-demand access where they can kind of check whenever they need to about how they're doing. They're not waiting, a week or 2 weeks to get kind of a payroll report about what their labor costs are looking like. They can pull it right up on their iPhone or their iPad and say, hey, I have X number of hours to get this project done. I've spent X hours to date. I have X hours remaining. And that kind of immediate check that they can have to look at how they're performing on a project gives them a lot more agency to make sure that they're managing the project how they need to.